Let me tell you a story about the first good CD player I ever owned. It was the JVC XL-Z555 from 1988, and it was the best player I could afford at the time. For a brief period, it was the top of JVC's line, and it had a couple of neat party tricks that set it apart from other players, even more expensive ones. I'd had a CD player before that, but it was part of a cheap plastic Emerson all-in-one stereo that I wouldn't wish on anybody. But this was my introduction to the format. These pictures are not mine, but this was the actual model stereo that I had in 1986. The CD player on mine stopped reading discs only about a year after I got it, though I remember somehow figuring out that it'd usually work if I raised them off the tray. I stuck felt pads to the inner ring of some of my discs, and you can still see the residue on a couple of the early ones that I still have. So I was really happy to finally have my JVC just out of high school. It was an aspirational player for someone my age. I have only one picture of it from my setup at college, a picture I took in case anyone stole my stereo, so I could show the cops and they could then put their top men on finding and recovering it. All of these components were things I bought while working at Drucker's Discount Warehouse in New Jersey, and they were all great, except maybe for that equalizer that was trying to compensate for the crappy speakers I brought with me to my dorm room. A few years after graduating college, though, DVD was launched, and with it, players that would play both DVDs and CDs. I bought a Sony DVPS 3000, which, like the JVC, was a well-regarded but not quite high-end player. It made my JVC seem redundant, so I sold it to my roommate. I've regretted that ever since, especially now that I've got multiple stereo and video systems in different rooms of my house. There's always room for one more decent component somewhere. So I set up an eBay alert and scoured the web at large for another XL-Z555. And this dragged on for years. It became my white whale. This particular model just didn't come up that often. When it did, it was almost always missing the remote or the wood side panels, or it looked like it had been salvaged from a dumpster. And I wanted one in the same condition as when I sold it. So I waited. And, well, the wait is over. So beyond personal nostalgia, what's special about this player? Well, like I said about my Pioneer PDM 900, first, just look at it. Like that Pioneer that I think shares a lot of the same design cues, in my opinion, this is about the peak of 1980s CD player design. And being that the compact disc is probably the most 1980s format that there is, that also means this is peak CD player design, period. Yes, I know Sony and Philips invented the format, so you could argue that their designs are somehow more authentic. Here is Sony's top player of 1988, the CDP 707 ESD, and for the record, I really like this too. I'd love to have one. It does have better specs as well, but it also cost a lot more, so they're not really comparable, but both were the top of the line for each respective manufacturer at the time. But there is something about the design of the XL-Z555 that simultaneously feels more 1980s, more maximalist, and more tasteful and thoughtful than any of Sony or Philips designs from that era. And it's probably because that combination is a really tough thing to do. It's tough enough to do now that nobody even really tries to do it anymore. There's an element of high design to the XL-Z555 that I find unexpected, and that took me a while to appreciate. It is very traditionally Japanese in how unified and zen-like its design actually is, especially for a component this complex. You would probably never guess that there are 37 buttons on the front of this player. It just looks very ordered. It also looks massive. It has the appearance of a player that's a lot bigger than it is. It looks like a serious stereo component. That's clearly intentional, because this is achieved in part by using the black wood side panels as an integrated element in the design itself. They're not tacked on to an already existing player. The tray on the left and buttons on the right are pushed all the way up to the edges in a way that makes the player just look odd with the side panels taken off, and given the length of the included screws and the fact that the only screws included are sized for the wood panels, they were clearly never meant to be taken off. The wood panels are not just decorative, they are part of the actual design. It also has a very large display, and this is one of the things that attracted me to it as a kid. This was also probably peak display. CD player displays started out small and got bigger throughout the 80s, until right about this time, then they started getting smaller again. There's a reason for that large display. It enabled one of the player's party tricks that I'll talk about shortly. But it of course also has room to display the full CD contents, program information, and plenty of other stuff too, unlike many lesser players of both then and now. Graham of Spare Time Repair would be happy to see that it also displays the table of contents when the CD is stopped. I never realized that this was not a universal feature, but in fact almost none of the players he's repaired on his channel will do it. It should go without saying that the entire case is metal, including the faceplate, and it feels thick. It wouldn't be easy to dent. It's not ridiculously heavy, but it still feels pretty tank-like. And indeed, this one needed nothing but a new belt to work as new. You can directly compare the JVC to the Philips CD880, which was introduced the same year, cost about the same as the JVC, and has a basically similar look and layout, but I feel is far, far uglier. This is of course subjective, as all design opinions are. You can disagree. Anyone can have a YouTube channel, you know. You're free to make a video about how beautiful the CD880 is. I'm sure somebody already has. In terms of features, by 1988, most single CD players had become pretty standardized. Across the bottom front, it's got your basic play, pause, stop, skip, and search buttons, and above those is a smaller row of buttons that includes repeat and memory functions, as well as other stuff I'll show you in a minute. On the right side are direct track access buttons, along with program editing, display, and other stuff. The play and pause buttons themselves do not light up as they do on my PDM 900, but there is a light above the CD tray that JVC calls optical link. It's supposed to be lit when the laser is reading something, so essentially it is a play-pause light, but it does blink when the player is trying to read something but hasn't tracked and focused yet. So it's at least a little more functional than a dumb light that turns on solid just from clicking the button. On the back, this player does have a higher end set of outputs than most CD players came with at the time, but that you'd honestly expect by then on a player costing $500 or more. We've got optical and coaxial digital outputs, as well as fixed and variable analog outputs. This seemed like a big deal to me at the time, because this was just about the only player I could afford that had digital outputs. Not that I've ever used them. I'm fine with the analog stage in the player itself. So what about sound? Well, you're in luck, because I'm going to have a video about the sound of CD players very soon, so I won't talk too much about that here. But let's take a quick look inside to see what components the XL-Z555 has. So I had to open the player up anyway to replace the belt that I mentioned earlier, and here's an overview of what it looks like inside. Obviously that's the transport over there on the left, and you see it is pretty oversized for what it needs to be. The transformer is above that, and then on the right side of this photo we've got the main system board. There's another board there under that big shield that's on the right, on the front of the player, you know, up at the top. I don't know what that board is, but I didn't need to mess with it, so I just kind of left it there. Here's the transport itself. In order to get to that belt, I had to remove the whole transport, and that belt that you see there is not the belt that I needed to replace. That belt is okay. That's the belt that controls the tray moving in and out, and it seems to work fine. But here is the belt that I needed to replace. This is the underside of the transport, and the only way to get to it is to take the whole thing out. And the belt itself was not in terrible condition, but you see it looks like it's actually covered with grease. I'm not sure how that happened, but I removed that belt, I cleaned everything up, put on a new belt, and then I actually cleaned and re-greased both the worm gear here as well as the rail that the laser sled moves up and down. So everything is fully serviced now, and it's nicely functional. It works great. So while I'm in here, this is, again, the transformer up here on the left of this video, and the power supply section of the board is right next to it. Then on the right here, we've got the two Burr Brown PCM56P DACs, and these were pretty good DACs. This is the standard grade, not the J or the K grade, but these were, you know, already considered pretty good DACs at the time, and there's two of them here, so one for each channel. Again, that's better than a lot of players at the time having two supposedly reduces jitter and timing errors and stuff like that. So this is the analog stage over here. It's got the DACs, the filter chip, the op-amp chip. The filter in this player, it's again a 4 times oversampling filter, which was good, but you know, other players, high-end players had 8 or even 16 by then, but lower-end players had 2 or even no oversampling. So yeah, pretty good analog stage. There's just one op-amp chip. It's the JVC XL-Z555. It's a dual-channel op-amp chip. My Pioneer has 2 5532DD chips. I don't know the difference, and I don't know why it has 2. You don't need 2. It's not like the DACs. I think one might be for the variable output or something like that, but I don't really know why one player has 1 and the other has 2. So not particularly high-end, though you do see it sometimes referred to that way. It is part of JVC's Super Digifine series, similar to Onkyo's Integra, Sony's ES, or Pioneer's Elite line, but with a much more 80s name than any of them. Its Burr Brown PCM56P DACs in standard grading were solid but unspectacular for the day, though it did have 1 for each channel like many higher-end players. Similarly, its 4 times oversampling filter was good for its time, but not as good as the 8 times oversampling done in my PDM 900. That is part of why the PDM 900 cost more though, and still does in similar condition. But no, I think where JVC put their time, effort, and money is in the design and construction of this player, not the internal components. Which is not to say it sounds subpar. Again, I will have a video where I test whether you can even hear the difference between the sound of CD players very soon. One other thing that I want to talk about that actually did separate good CD players from less good CD players is the speed. Watch how fast I can turn on the player and be playing a disc in this thing. Everything is fast, from the tray coming out to it being sucked back in to it reading the disc and starting to play. Now compare this to my Pioneer Blu-ray player, which I think is typical for a later disc-based player. Even just turning it on takes forever, and you see I press the open and close and it doesn't even open, and that's because I kind of didn't give it enough time to boot up. It drives me crazy, to be honest. But now I'm putting the disc in, and you know, it's slower to push the tray out, it's slower to take it back in, and it's slower to then play it. So everything is slower. It's small things like this that kind of add up to a frustrating experience. And again here, I just want to show how confidently it clamps down from the inside. It's like it knows what it's doing. The sound of this in real life is impressive. I actually think the XL-Z555 being top of the line was a mistake. Just a few months into its reign, JVC launched the XL-Z1010, a much different player with objectively better specifications, including the PDM 900-like PCM56P J grade DACs and 8 times oversampling. I believe this model was even on the market when I bought my 555, but I could neither afford it nor did I like the look of it much, with its smaller display, incidentally missing the party trick I've been teasing, and its ugly gray buttons hidden behind a door. Don't hide the buttons, just make them look nice. Doors like this always break anyway, so I just wasn't much interested in this player, even though it was probably always meant to be above the XL-Z555 in the lineup and just arrived late. My guess is that JVC didn't have the clout to get their hands on enough J-grade DACs to launch the 1010 when they wanted to. So what are these cool party tricks the 555 could do? Well, first of all, there's this. Sure, CD text, right? No big whoop. But this was 1988. Go Google CD text and tell me when it became available. I'll wait. How was this done? Like everything else in the world that's good. Manually. Yes, you had to sit there and enter in disc and track titles letter by letter if you wanted them displayed like this. But you only needed to do it once, and the player would remember that CD forever. I sat there for hours and did this for all of my CDs over the first few days I owned this player. And I did it from then on for any new CD I bought. It only took a few minutes for a single CD. I can't say I know the technical details of how this works. It's just some kind of non-volatile memory, and it must be looking at some part of the subcode on the disk to identify what it is. Of course, I probably won't enter all my discs again now, but it was really cool at the time. I doubt this was the only player that had this feature, but it was the only one I knew of back then, and the only one I can think of off the top of my head right now that was available in 1988. In fact, Sony had a similar feature in their high-end players called Disc Memo, but it was what it sounded like, a single memo for the disc that could be the album or band name or whatever else. JVC lets you enter track titles as well, so probably just a little more memory. I still don't know of another player that would do that at this time. There may have been more that could do it later. My PDM 900 could use text names for the programs and display them on the remote, but that's a different thing. There's one more thing, and I'm sure this made me giggle like a little schoolgirl the first time I saw it. It still makes me smile. It's this. Why would JVC motorize the little headphone jack knob? I think it's pretty hilarious, and I always did. Plenty of receivers at this time had motorized main volume knobs, and that in itself was considered kind of a gee-whiz feature. But that was basically necessary if you wanted to allow people to change volume with a remote, as was becoming expected for the main system volume. Nowadays, it's all just done digitally, and usually the knob doesn't move at all, but in those days, most volume knobs were still using potentiometers, so to change the volume, something had to change the physical position of the knob, hence motors. But in a CD player? Like the text thing, I can't say this is the only one that ever did it, but I've honestly never seen it elsewhere. My other CD players either just don't let you change the headphone or variable line output volume at all with the remote, or they do it through digital attenuation that doesn't require any movement of the knob. JVC seems to be using a potentiometer like in a receiver and motorizing it to physically control the volume. They really didn't have to do this. They could have just left it off the remote or done it an easier way. But it is just fun to play with and watch the little knob move. I do it constantly. I'm always afraid I'm going to break it, but I haven't yet on 2 different players. So I'll keep having fun with it. By the way, I don't know if you saw where the knob was when I started the clip showing it. Here it is again, and that's as high as I can comfortably have it when using my Audio-Technica studio monitors. This thing can get loud. It has a really powerful headphone amp. I wonder if maybe that's why you would have 2 op-amp chips. I wonder if the headphone amp is being controlled by the same op-amp chip in this player as the line output. Feel free to let me know in the comments if you know. Well, that's about it. Some of you are going to say it's a CD player. And yes, it is. But I still think it's quite a good one, and not terribly expensive when they do come up, and I'm happy to have one again. It's like revisiting an old friend. CDs are making a comeback, if you haven't heard. Go out and get yourself a good player like this one while they're still cheap, relatively speaking. Watch for my videos soon on the sound of CD players. I'll be comparing 5 of them. Or really, you will be, because it's gonna be a test. Start training your ears. I'll see you guys then. Bye-bye.